In today's episode of Locked On Pistons podcast, we will be discussing who should be closing the game for the Pistons this upcoming season. Should Asar Thompson, Tobias, Simone Fontecchio close? Should Isaiah Stewart or Jalen Duren close? We'll go through each position, battle, and discuss who should close in today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I am your host, Koo Cahill. You can find me over on Twitter at Koo Cahill. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. You'll hear more about Game Time a little bit later. In today's episode, I was inspired by a tweet from our friend Jack Kelly. He tweeted out a graphic that said, this could be the Pistons' quote, death lineup. And then he put what lineup he believed would be like the best lineup to close with, basically. I almost had now look, no shade at all to what Jack did. I thought it was a great discussion. I'm taking it. I'm giving props to that content idea. But as some people have already pointed out, the Pistons having a death lineup after winning 14 games is pretty funny. But I get the idea, and I'm taking it because I think it's a great idea myself. So I wanted to discuss it. Except I want to go position by position and discuss who I think should be closing for the Pistons. Now, I'll go ahead and spoil it for you guys. The only lock that closes every game will be Cade Cunningham. I don't even need to discuss the point guard position. Cade is the only lock I think that should close, obviously, every single game that is played for the Detroit Pistons, unless he has 6 fouls, fouled out, or he's injured. Like, that's the only way Cade Cunningham should not be closing games. So we'll go through each position. But the position I think that is going to cause the most conversation, I think the position that we'll see the most, be it fluid the most, is the center position. I think that is the position that we'll see change most often when it comes to the closing lineup. And that is between Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart. So I just want to lay the groundwork for what should go into this decision with Isaiah Stewart and Jalen Duren. Now, I don't think there's any discussion about who's going to start, because I think it's very clear 100% that Jalen Duren is going to be the starter for the Detroit Pistons. And I don't disagree with that. He's the best fit offensively with Cade Cunningham. But closing is a different issue. So obviously in Duren's camp, pro Duren closing, that is him being the best fit probably with Cade Cunningham. That probably is his number one reason to close with him. He is the best fit with Cade. Along with this, I'm just going to throw some numbers out. According to Synergy, he ranked in the 79th percentile as a pick and roll man. He ranked in the 74th percentile in offensive rebounds and putbacks. And at the rim, he ranked in the 88th percentile on 437 possessions at the rim. So one of the best finishers in the league. He was one of the best pick and roll guys in the league, one of the best lob threats in the league, one of the best offensive rebounders in the league. That is everything that's swinging for Jalen Duren. Along with that, you can run more stuff through him offensively. Even, we'll get into this later, depending who the off guard is next to Cade. Again, we'll get into that later. Let's say you don't have someone that you think can create much with off guard from Cade. Duren, you can actually run some offense through, like from the high post area, from the slot area, around the wing area. Run some DHOs. He's able to make passes on backdoor cuts. I think he got a lot better as a DHO screener this past year. He's a really good passer, and obviously he can make his own play off a live dribble coming off a DHO. So I think that is everything that's in Duren's favor for closing games. It basically is all offensive, but I think it's really important having someone who can really fit with Cade and help Cade in the pick and roll game when we know that Cade, this past season was a pick and roll merchant. We'll see if that continues to be the case, but I think it probably will. Cade loves running pick and roll. Having the best fit for that offense, having that on the floor is probably going to be a high priority for the Detroit Pistons, especially when it comes to closing games. Now, let's go to the other end. Isaiah Stewart. I think Isaiah Stewart has a big case for closing as well. The first case, obviously, is the fact that he's just a far better defender than Jalen Duren. Not only is he a better defender than Jalen Duren, he's also a more versatile defender than Jalen Duren. He can play multiple different defensive strategies, defensive coverages. His best is switching, but he can play different defensive coverages. And honestly, switching is probably what the Pistons want to do. They've said it for years that they want to be a switching team, even from Dwayne to Monty. I assume you're going to continue to see the same thing with JB. This is just something I think the NBA is going. Unless you have a pure drop big, you're probably going to switch a lot. And Isaiah Stewart, especially at the end of games when opposing offenses, a lot of times at the end of games just resorts to, we're going to seek out the weak mismatch. We're going to seek out the center. We're going to create mismatches, and we're going to attack. Having Isaiah Stewart on the floor kind of makes that harder for opposing offenses, especially with the type of lineups you can put around Isaiah Stewart at the 5 to really make it hard on teams defensively. So I think it matters what type of lineup you're putting on the floor with Stu to really maximize him, but defensively is where his argument comes from. Some numbers to back this up. The Pistons ranked 25th in the NBA this past year in defensive rating at 118.0. When Isaiah Stewart was on the floor this past year, the Pistons had a defensive rating of 114.5. That would get them all the way up to mid-tier defense? Yeah, they would rank 15th in the NBA, exactly middle of the pack defensively. That's a huge jump. So when he was on the floor, the Pistons had an adequate offense. When Isaiah Stewart was on the floor, or not offense, defense. When Isaiah Stewart was on the floor, they survived defensively. They were okay defensively. They were average defensively. When he wasn't, they were pretty bad. Really bad defensively when he was off the floor. They had a defensive rating of 118.8 when he was off the floor, which is even worse than where they ranked on the season. That would have them at 28th in the NBA. So that is the main argument for Isaiah Stewart, is that not only is he a better defender, he's a more versatile defender, and it allows you to play more creative lineups. So just for example, we'll get into some of this later, but just for example, you can run a lineup of Cade, Asar, Simone, Tobias, and Stu, and now no one on the floor is below 6'6". Everyone on the floor is at least adequate defensively. You can switch across the board. Everyone's around the same size. You can switch across the board, and it's going to be tough to just seek and destroy guys. And you're not going to be able to just call your big man up for a pick and roll, get the switch, and attack like teams love to do at the end of games, because you're going to have Isaiah Stewart, and Isaiah Stewart's one of the best switching big men in the entire NBA on the defensive side of the floor. And it's not just that line. That's just a line I threw out there. But you can be more creative with your lineups closing because Isaiah Stewart gives you that versatility defensively. But the other thing that gives Isaiah Stewart a positive over Jalen Duren's a much better finisher. He's a much better, I would say he's probably a better screener at this point. He's a better lob catcher. I think he's a better pick and roll guy. But Isaiah Stewart has something on him that is pretty valuable. And it's the fact that he's a stretch big. This past season, he actually became a stretch big. Not hoping for it, not seeing it in his future. This past year, he actually became one, which is why he's turned me into, let's just be honest, I'm kind of a fan of his now. I really do think he's a pretty valuable player. Before, I was questioning it. Now, I think he's a really valuable player. He's a legit stretch 5 now. And when you play him at the 5 position, when you have the ability to play a 5 that is versatile in the defensive end and also spaces the floor for you offensively, it just changes the dimensions on the court. It changes everything. It changes your game plan, changes your offense, it changes your defense. It helps everything. It helps spacing. And like I said, for example, let's say you want to run that lineup of Isaiah Stewart and Asar Thompson. Let's say you want to run that lineup and you fill in the blanks for that defensive lineup I mentioned earlier. Having that spacer at the 5 allows you to not have multiple non-shooters on the floor. So now you can take advantage of Asar's defense, of him and Isaiah Stewart's defense. Both of them pretty impactful on that end. And then offensively, they will fit. You can use Asar how he needs to be used, and you can use Isaiah Stewart how he needs to be used, and they both make each other better in that aspect. Isaiah Stewart this past year, just to buffer my point, on spot-up opportunities, he ranked in the 67th percentile. Synergy has that ranked as very good. Now, he did get hurt, so it is a limited sample, even though I think it's a large enough sample. It was 170 possessions. On all jump shots this past year, 179 possessions, 84th percentile. Excellent, Synergy calls it. Isaiah Stewart this past year became a legit stretch big. He's not Dirk. Like, I'm not saying he's the greatest stretch big ever, but he has become a legit stretch big. Along with his versatility defensively, I think that is what's going to cause the conversation on who closes at the 5 position. And honestly, I think if I was the coach, I probably would find myself closing more with Isaiah Stewart. Now, the only caveat here, the thing that would change this all, and then we'll move on to the next position. The thing that would change everything for this conversation is if Jalen Duren takes a step defensively. If Jalen Duren takes a step defensively, I don't see a closing time he doesn't play. I can't see it. If he actually has improved defensively, where he is like he is good defensively, then you close with him every time. He's just like Cade at that point. You close with him every time unless he's in foul trouble or he's hurt. Because that's what's going to keep him off the floor. You can live with the fact that he's not a spacer. He doesn't have to be a three-point shooter. That's not what his archetype is. You don't need that. The fact he's so bad defensively brings all that other stuff Stu does. That's what makes it even more impactful on the floor. If Duren's a good defender, then he's locked, just like Cade, where they're on the floor every single time unless injury or foul trouble. So that's where I stand with it right now. If Duren does not take a step defensively, I'm probably closing with Stu because of the versatility he gives you defensively and because he spaces the floor offensively. So that's where I stand with that. Let me know what you guys think. Comment section down below or over on Twitter at Kuka Hill. Who would you guys close between Isaiah Stewart or Jalen Duren? Next, we're going to get into who should close. Jaden Ivey, Malik Beasley, THJ, or another option at the off-guard position. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Give online therapy a try at betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA and get on your way to being your best self. When your schedule is packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even when we all know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. We're all dealing with something, whether it's something small, whether it's something big, or if it's something, multiple small things that have eventually built into one big thing. We're all dealing with something. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month with BetterHelp. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. So continuing our episode discussing who should be the closing lineup, who should close at each position for the Detroit Pistons. We now move on to the off-guard position, the guy that's going to be playing next to Cade Cunningham. And there's a few options. This is probably, I think, the Pistons' deepest position on the roster. And honestly, I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. I think all the out of all the positions on the Pistons roster, like their point guard Cade, their wing position I think is pretty good. I think they should feel pretty good about their wing position with Tobias, Simone, Asar. I think they should feel good about that. I'm talking about 3 and 4 too when I say wing, like the 3 and 4. I think they should feel good about that position. They're 5. I think they should feel really good about that position. I think the position on the floor that has the most question marks right now is that off-guard position. It's the 2-guard position. And I know I've been on the podcast before saying I would start Asar next to Cade and play Cade, Asar, Simone, Tobias, and Duren. That would be my starting 5. But for this exercise, I'm not going to include Asar as the 2 because I do think that my suggested starting lineup probably as as time's gone on, I think I wouldn't say it's impossible. I just don't know if it's the most likely one. And I think they're probably going to try to play Asar as a 3. So it's possible they go with my lineup, and I would be ecstatic. I think that's the best one they can run. But I'm not going to include Asar in this exercise. He'll be included later when we talk about the wings. So just staying with this position, you're dealing with Malik Beasley. You're dealing with Jaden Ivey, Tim Hardaway Jr., Marcus Sasser, And then obviously in my hypothetical, what I would do like Asar, but again, like I said, we're not going to include Asar in this exercise. So there's a lot of options for the Detroit Pistons. Now, I don't think Marcus Sasser obviously is an option in this regard. I don't think it's going to be hard for me to even see Marcus Sasser getting minutes this year, let alone closing. So take that for what you will. The real argument is Malik Beasley, THJ, and Jaden Ivey. So I think we obviously should start with Jaden Ivey because Jaden Ivey is the fan favorite. Jaden Ivey is the guy that not everyone, but a lot of people in the fan base love and hope big things for. And here's the argument for Jaden Ivey. It's not on defense. The argument for Jaden Ivey is that he's probably the only other, as of right now, he's probably the only other player, even though I don't think he's great at this, he's probably just the best option at this point at creating offense. Simply because of his speed, his athleticism, his quickness, his ability to be an immediate paint touch. Jaden Ivey is a paint touch almost every time he touches the floor when he wants to be. Now, his decision-making once he gets there, he can improve it. But he has flashed those playmaking abilities, especially at the back end of his rookie season. Even this past year, at the beginning of the year, he showcased it a little bit more. As the season went on, he got worse at it. But he's the only one that has flashed the ability to give me the ball. I can run a pick and roll. You can give me the ball, and I can create some offense for the team. I can go to the rim. I can kick out. I can get all the way to the basket, score. Like, he's the only other person that has flashed consistent enough, I guess, ability versus what he's competing against at creating offense for himself and others. Just for some numbers to back this up, this past season, Synergy has him as an average pick and roll ball handler. He had 334 possessions. He was in the 43rd percentile. However, in isolation attempts, now this is a very small sample size, 92 possessions, he was in the 72nd percentile. So overall, my point is that if you put the ball in Jaden Ivey's hands, you want someone else to relieve the pressure off of Cade. You don't want Cade to have the ball every single time down the floor. Who's the other player that has, as of this moment, based off what we've seen so far, has the most capability to attempt to create some offense? It's Jaden Ivey. Now, again, the problem for Jaden Ivey is that he's not great at that yet. It's still something he has to improve on. Synergy has him average. I would say this past season, he was probably slightly below average, but still that's slightly below average is still a better option than everything else on the team. So that's the thing that's helping Ivey the most, is that he's probably the only other guy that you can bet on to bring you some kind of offense with the ball in his hands for himself and others. And if you don't want Cade to have the ball in his hands all the time, there you go. There's your option right there. Ivey's not going to bring you much defensively. I think everyone knows that. So that's a problem there. But the other thing is his other options, the other possible options, they're not good defensively either. When it comes to Malik Beasley and THJ, they're both bad defensively. So it's a wash in that respect. And like I mentioned, not only can Jaden Ivey create offense for himself and create offense somewhat for others, he's an immediate paint touch that defensive have to cover for. Now, this past season, he was not a good finisher. He hasn't been a good finisher so far in his career. He's at the 25th percentile. They have that as below average, according to Synergy, around the rim. He's not a good finisher at this point. However, simply having a guy that can bend the defense and collapse the defense, basically every possession if he wants, is valuable. He has to make the right decision out of that, but simply having that is valuable. Because even if he doesn't make the shot at the rim, let's say Ivey doesn't improve as a decision maker, and he's wishy-washy when it comes to creating for others. There's highs and there's lows. Let's say he doesn't improve in that respect. Let's say he even stays the same as a finisher. Collapsing the defense and getting a shot on the rim like Ivey does, that he's always requiring help defense because of that. So a center is going to rotate, or the rim protector is going to rotate and try to contest the shot, which, when you have Duren on the floor, creates easy putback opportunities. It goes as a miss for Ivey, but that's valuable. Simply having someone that can bend the defense like that and collapse the defense, it's valuable. So that's Ivey's biggest proponent for closing, is that he's the only other guy that you can give the ball to and say, we're going to relieve some pressure off of Cade, go collapse the defense, go try to create something. And he is the only other person that has shown the ability to do that so far. That's his biggest and by far proponent. I don't know if there's anything else you really want to bring to the argument for Ivey. So that's Ivey's case. The case for Malik Beasley and THJ, and I think they're both I'm including them as like one player because they both have the similar they both have similar defense and offense. Like they're pretty similar players, I would say, at this point for what the Pistons need. Um, they're both bad defenders. They're not very good defenders, and they're both really good shooters. Like that's what they bring. And depending what lineup the Pistons play, you may need more spacing. And Ivy at this point is not a good shooter. So at this point, you may need really good spacing next to Cade. And there has been Trajan and people I've talked to and heard from, there has been a lot of talk about spacing. So I won't be surprised if you see stretches of games where you see Cade, a lob threat, and just shooters around him. Like a lineup with Cade, Malik Beasley, Simone Fontecchio, and Tobias with Duren. Or even a Cade, Malik Beasley, THJ, and Tobias. Like any of those combinations, I can see those stretches happening because of how much I've heard spacing stressed about this offseason for this team moving forward. So that's the immediate proponent for them over Ivy. Is that, okay, he can create more with the ball in his hands, but we can provide more spacing, more gravity for Cade offensively. We can space the floor and make it easier on him when he's on the floor because defenses aren't going to suck in. And if they do suck in, he can kick out to us, and we are going to hit the three and make them pay for it. That's the argument. All of them are bad defensively. Ivy brings more as a secondary ball handler than those guys, but they bring more as shooters than Ivy. So it's just a matter of which one you want to go with. As of right now, who I would be closing with, it really just depends on the matchup, I think. It depends on what they want to do. It depends on what it really just depends on what they're trying to do. Are they trying to, like, are they playing Cade with Ivy and then Tobias and Simone with Stu? Is that something they're doing? Then okay, then I'd go with Ivy because you need some secondary ball handling, and Stu hopefully can help defensively. You have the spacing at the other three positions, so that would be the hope right there, right? So if you're not going that route, if let's say you're playing with Duren down the stretch, and you have, let's say you have a SAR in the lineup, then obviously you need the spacing of a THJ or a Malik Beasley. So that's the route. Those are the routes that they can go. Those are the options. So I really think it's up in the air and it's going to change night to night. The only person that can solidify this spot, and then we'll move on to the next position, is Jaden Ivey. If Jaden Ivey decides that, or not decides, if he improves, as my dog is barking her head, I don't know what's going on out there. We're going to have to pause after this. I'll be right back. But Jaden Ivey, he can improve as a shooter to where he's bringing he's bringing spacing, he's bringing shooting along with the secondary playmaking. He's gonna be better than both those guys because none of them are good defensively. And if he can just get as an above average shooter along with his finishing, his ability to get to the rim and his secondary playmaking, then he'll become a lock. But he has to improve those areas, and I really would like to see him improve as a secondary playmaker because that would really solidify himself as well. Not just someone who can get to the rim, but someone who can get to the rim and then make the right decisions, make the right plays. That would really separate him as well. So that's my opinion on that. Let me know what you guys think. Comment section down below or over on Twitter at Cougar Hill. Who would you guys close with? Jaden Ivey, Malik Beasley, or it's THJ? Again, let me know in the comment section down below or over on Twitter at Cougar Hill. Next up, who are you closing with? Asar, Tobias, or Simone Fontecchio? We'll talk about that position coming up. Are you looking to purchase tickets to an event that you're really interested in going to? Then Game Time is the place for you. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and events near you. They also have view from your seat within the app. You don't have to purchase the tickets, get to the event, see that your seats aren't that great. No, you can see right in the app what your seats look like, what tickets are the best for you. They also have a lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Download the Game Time app and create an account and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed with Game Time. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. So we've went through the point guard position, obviously. That's Cade. We went through the center position between Stewart and Duren. We went through the off-guard position with Ivey, Beasley, and THJ. And now we are going to discuss who should start at the wings. Ausar, Tobias, Simone. What should be the combination of those positions? Now, I'm not including the rookie Ron Holland in this, but I don't think Ron Holland is going to be closing games. And I'm also unsure if he's even going to be in the rotation at this point this year. We'll see. It's possible, but he doesn't have a clear pathway, I don't think. And he's raw at this point. So I don't know if he's going to be in the rotation. I would be pretty surprised if he's closing games for the Pistons. So I'm not including him. I'm also not including Bobby Klitman for the same reasons. I don't know if he's even going to be in the rotation. I would be pretty shocked if he's closing games. If either of them, though, I will say if either of them are closing games, something amazing must have happened. They must have had an incredible development. They must have came in way better than originally thought. Capable of making an immediate impact quicker than we thought. So if that happens, then I would be happy to be wrong about that kind of thing. But I can't see that. I don't think many people do either. So it's between, I think, Ausar, Tobias, and Simone. So I'll make it clear again. My starting lineup and what I think the best lineup would be has Ausar at the 2. But I will admit that I think it's I don't want to say a long shot. It's just not as one of the probable lineups that maybe JB will go with. I think it's possible. It's certainly on the board. I just don't. It's not likely enough to where I'm going to sit here and build a whole podcast when we're discussing about closing around that because I don't know how likely it is. So we're going to keep Ausar in the wing position. So I think the one lock, or maybe not lock, near lock. I won't say lock because I can't see him not closing, but a near lock is Tobias. I can't see the Pistons paying Tobias Harris all that money. And also, like, Tobias is just better than all these players. Like, I know people like to make fun of Tobias for some reason. I don't get it. We don't need to get into all that again. But Tobias is probably the Pistons' second best player right now, like behind Cade. Like, to be honest, like if we're just being honest, like he is probably their second best player. And I'm not sure why you wouldn't have your second best player on the floor. Like, maybe Duren becomes the second best player this year. Maybe he improves defensively. Maybe Ausar becomes the second best player. Heck, maybe Ivey becomes the second best player. Maybe one of those guys do. But at this moment of time, Tobias is the clear number 2 player on this team, like the second best player on this team. So I can't see them not closing with him. But it's like if one of these guys does take a jump, like if Ausar does take a jump and Tobias is just playing horribly, like, yeah, I can see him not closing. But I have to believe more often than not, like 90% of the time, Tobias Harris will be on the floor closing. So I'm going to fill him in at the 4 position. I'm going to put him at the 4 because I think, like I said, I really do think like 90% of the time he will be on the floor. So then it comes between Ausar and Simone, I think, at that point. Unless, again, maybe Tobias, knock on wood, God forbid, but if he were to have like a fall off in his game, you guys get the J. Cole reference there. Tobias, J. Cole look the same. The fall off, my rap listeners, they get what I'm saying. If Tobias were to have a fall off in this game, then obviously you just play Ausar and Simone. But I don't suspect that to happen. So I'm going to pencil in Tobias at the 4. Tobias is one of the best versatile offensive players in the NBA when it comes to scoring. He can score literally from everywhere on the floor, whether it's three-pointer, whether it's spot-up opportunities, whether it's posting up mismatches, whether it's isolation. He can score literally just about in every facet of the game at a reasonable level. So Tobias, and he has size, he has long arms, so he's able to he's not going to be a straight up awful defender. Like, he's going to be at least an adequate one, especially if he's trying. Like, he should be an adequate defender for the Detroit Pistons. So that's why you close it Tobias. Ausar and Simone, the reasoning for both are very simple. Ausar Thompson, according to multiple lineups, if you go through each of the lineups for the Detroit Pistons that have the best defensive rating, Ausar is in every single one of them. I don't think people truly realize how impactful Ausar was already on the defensive end of the floor. As a rookie, he was already the Pistons' most impactful defender by far of any rotational player that played over 900 minutes. Like guys that weren't acquired after the deadline and played junk time, really. So there's rotation players. Ausar Thompson wipes them all out in defensive. When he was on the floor, the Pistons had a 113.1 defensive rating. The next closest was Isaiah Stewart at 14.5. Every defensive lineup, every best lineup that you will see from the Pistons this past year had Ausar Thompson on it. The lineup after the trade deadline, where they played Jaden Ivey, Cade, Simone, Ausar, and Duren. Heck, you throw any combination of those lineups with Ausar, with Duren, and Cade, whether it's Ivy and Simone, whether it was Sasser and Simone, whether it was Ivy and Fournier, whatever lineup you want to throw out there, they survived defensively, were fine defensively because Ausar was out there. Ausar was that impactful as a defender in his rookie season. So having your best defender off the floor in closing minutes, especially at the wing position where majority of the best players in the league are at, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to not have him on the floor to guard the Jason Tatums, the KDs, the Jalen Browns, guys like that. It's going to be hard to not have him on the floor to guard those guys. Heck, not even just those guys. Ausar can guard point guards. We saw him guard Trae Young, really took him out the game. We saw him guard DeJounte Murray in that Atlanta Hawks game. Like, we've seen him guard every position below the 5 position and impact what goes on the floor. So just not having your best defender on the floor, I think it's going to be a tough thing for JB to do, especially because he has a defensive mindset. I would just struggle to see that happening. So I think Asar's closing chance is rather high. However, Simone Fontecchio was quite literally one of the best shooters in the NBA this past season. I'm still shocked the Pistons got him for the deal that they did. Once they acquired Simone Fontecchio, their offense, their overall team played completely different. In the minutes that he played before he got hurt and sat out the season, the Pistons actually looked like a normal bad team. They weren't historically bad. They weren't the worst team in franchise history bad. Like, they were just normal team bad. Like, they were just like, oh, okay, I can watch this team. They'll probably lose, but we can watch that team. Like, that's what they were once Simone Fontecchio joined the team. And it's because of his ability to space the floor, how good of a shooter he was, how good he was at attacking off the dribble on closeouts, and also how great he was in transition as well. He wasn't just a slouch defensively like Bojan was. Again, another player that just tried defensively. He has the size and simply tried defensively. And to back up these numbers, at the rim this past season for the Detroit Pistons, he was in the 70th percentile. On all jump shots, 94th percentile. Excellent. On spot-up opportunities, 72nd percentile. In transition, he was in the 98th percentile during his time with Detroit. This dude shot 56% from 3 in transition. You know how lethal that is to have a guy that's running down the wing in transition, knowing that if you don't account for him, he's going to more than one out of, like, what is that? Like one, I'm not good with math, but basically half the time he's going to make it. Slightly more than half the time he's going to hit that shot if you don't close out on him. Like, he was incredibly impactful for the Detroit Pistons. I think he's going to play a lot of minutes for the Pistons this upcoming season, which is why I think they really should just close and start Cade, Ausar, Simone, Tobias, and Duren. I think that was by far the best balance of defense, offense, spacing, fit. I think that's by far the best. But in the case that they don't go that way, that's the argument. I think Tobias has to close. He's going to be your second best player, at least right now. And between Ausar and Simone, that's really going to be a tough decision for JB. Do you leave your best defender off the floor, along with the potential of him becoming that secondary playmaker eventually, along with his passing ability, his ability to read the floor, be versatile offensively in the positions you can play him? Do you leave him off the floor? Do you leave off potentially your best shooter in Simone off the floor? Do you leave him off? It's really going to be a tough decision. If it's me, I told you guys what I'm doing. Cade, Ausar, Simone, Tobias, Duren. I think those are your 5 best players. I'm having my 5 best players on the floor. I think they all fit together. I think they all get the best out of each other. That's what I would do. If they do decide to close with one of Ivy, Beasley, THJ at the off-guard position, I have to choose. If I'm closing with Ivy and Duren, I have to assume either you're going full offense or you're just playing the young guys because you want the young guys to close. At that point, I would just play Ausar. If you're playing those guys, I figured you would need spacing, so I'm probably going to go with Simone and Tobias. If you're playing Caden Beasley or Caden THJ, I'm probably going Asar then, so you can have some defense on the floor. So that's going to be a really tough decision. Unless they go the route I went or with my lineup, I think it's really going to be tough on JB. So let me know in the comment section down below or over on Twitter at Kuka Hill. What's your answer to each position battle when it comes to closing? That's starting to closing games. And what's your closing lineup for the Detroit Pistons? Let me know in the comment section down below or over on Twitter at Kuka Hill. That's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to the YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Stay safe out there. Until next time, peace out.